Mitch, you're on. Thank you. Can't hear you, Mitchell.
One of us had to do it. Good morning, everyone. Hopefully you all can see my screen, but before I jump in, just want to congratulate Louis on his presidency. You're going to do great things, I imagine. So congratulations. I also want to acknowledge all the work the majority of you are doing related to the 2025 Los Angeles firestorm and the impacts it's had on all of the fire survivors. HCD is also involved in that work, and it's great to see everyone come together and be there for the folks that need us. So great work, and it'll continue for years to come, but we're doing it together. So thanks for that. I also wanted to acknowledge in the room, we have a fairly new individual on the HCD team side. Michael Barberi is here. He is our equivalent of our building official and code enforcement manager for HCD. He's been in this role for just a short period of time. And prior to that, he ran a permitting office and our building inspectors for the northern part of California. So just want to acknowledge that he's here, and you all will probably deal with him at some point in your careers. So I want to make that connection. With that, today, I'm very happy to talk about things that are really relevant to you all. I have a presentation, but really the benefit is the Q&A, and I want to offer any support where I can or answer any questions relevant to things you may need regarding the programs that HCD administers. And so I'm going to walk through a few of our programs. Some are not as relevant to this group, but just want you to have awareness and visibility on what HCD does. And then to walk through some of our the structures, either HCD has oversight, the nexus between local government and those structures and the standards that apply, and then some other structures that are outside of the scope of HCD and that fall under the local jurisdiction exclusively. There's always questions on delineation of jurisdiction, so happy to dispel any confusion that exists there. So with that, let me open this real quick. All right, so our first program I want to talk about, and I cannot see the chat, nor can I see you all, so please just interrupt me. I'll try to pause every once in a while. I like this dialogue to be open. If you have a question, I'm not offended. Interrupt, please. But the first program.
Yep. Mitchell, we'll have them drop the questions in, and we'll read them to you. The board will.
Oh, fantastic! If they're in the chat, that's great. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks. So the first program or collection of programs I want to talk about are HCD's mobile home park and special occupancy parks programs. So special occupancy parks is a catch-all for different types of parks that are generally recreational vehicle parks throughout the state. There's also temporary recreational vehicle parks and a few other types that fall under that umbrella. But generally speaking, there are RV parks. So HCD is the default enforcement agency for all of these type of parks throughout the state. They're privately owned parks that have 2 or more lots that are held out for rent or lease. We conduct construction inspections to permanent buildings within parks, any sort of infrastructure that supplies the parks within the boundaries of the park, and then the installation of units. We currently have oversight over about 82% of the parks. The remaining are under cities and counties that have received approval to act as a local enforcement agency. We also promulgate laws and regulations related to these different types of parks and issue permits to operate the business as a park through our permit to operate folks. One question I get about parks a lot that I want to kind of give you up front is the delineation of authority over certain types of site-built structures within parks. Very common question we get. So HCD has oversight over permanent buildings within parks pools, and other things, if they're provided to the guest or to the residents of the park or their guest, there's a special carve out within the laws that apply to mobile home parks and special occupancy parks for hotels, motels, apartments, and other dwellings that are site built in the park. If they're used by residents, or if they're used by just outside public, or anyone that's not a resident or their guest, that is squarely under the jurisdiction of a local enforcing agency, such as all of you, meaning permits are issued by you all for the construction, for any alterations, any conversions. There's basically a carve out within that park, and that those particular permanent buildings fall under your jurisdiction. There's things like businesses that we tend to see on the perimeter edges of parks. We see barbershops and convenience stores and things like that. If they're directly open to the public and exclusively open to the public, which is typical, that would also fall under the jurisdiction of you all and outside of HCDs. So there's a special carve out in Health and Safety Code 18304 that provides that direct clarification and authority for local jurisdictions. So I'll stop there on mobile home parks just briefly to see if there's any questions before I move on to other programs. All right. I'm sure there'll be a lot in the end. Another program that's brand new, and really, this particular program doesn't really touch a lot of you, but it's a new program. It's still under works, and it provides that each park have a park manager that's properly trained on the laws and regulations that apply to their job as a park manager. So the hope of this program is, created by the legislature, but the goal is to limit complaint investigations for you, all of you out there that are local enforcing agencies or local enforcement agencies of parks. This should help with some of the complaints received. HCD administers this program exclusively, and we will be providing third parties that will train park managers on all the laws that apply to them. And we hope to have this fully up and running in just a few months. So by the end of the year, having everyone trained is kind of our goal, every park manager. HCD also has oversight over privately owned and operated employee housing facilities. So these facilities house 5 or more employees. They're privately owned, they're not publicly owned or operated. And HCD's role is to do just a handful of things. We set the standards on a statewide level. We also conduct pre-occupancy inspections. So prior to an employee housing facility operator starting business and bringing folks in and housing them, we conduct inspections to ensure minimum health and safety. We also issue out permits to operate those facilities, and we do complaint investigations that can come from any source, and we investigate those to make sure there's some minimum health and safety. And we also promulgate the laws and regulations that apply. There's also the same type of delineation for local enforcement agencies. We do the majority of the state, and a handful of cities and counties operate an employee housing program locally. So we also have an occupational licensing program. We have some special investigators and peace officers that do fraud investigation. It's really connected to the sales of manufactured homes, mobile homes, and commercial modulars. I'll talk about those structures just a little bit later and what they are. But we have oversight throughout the entire state. We have folks in these positions that work from their home offices. So we cover the entire state and respond to any complaints submitted. We also license the folks, very similar to Department of Real Estate. It just has to do with manufactured homes, mobile homes, and commercial modulars. And so there's dealer lots throughout the state where they sell manufactured homes and commercial modulars, and we also inspect those facilities on an ongoing basis. We also do some continuing education and offer course providers. We only have a handful of them, but they provide training to all of the dealers and salespersons out there. We have a mobile home assistance center, and we have a fairly new program, the Mobile Home Residency Law Protection Program. So our mobile home assistance center is basically a triage system. It was formerly called an ombudsman, and they receive and process complaints for the entire division that I work in, and we conduct investigations based upon those. We tend to get complaints from property owners, residents within these different facilities that HCD has oversight over, but also local jurisdictions. You can submit complaints to HCD if there are issues with parks in jurisdictions where you're not the local enforcement agency, where there's concerns or issues with manufactured homes or mobile homes, the structures themselves inside the walls of those units. We can respond to complaint investigations submitted by any source. And the Mobile Home Residency Law Protection Program, it's a program that connects individuals with perceived violations of the civil code to legal service providers. We don't do much ourselves here in this program, but we are the conduit to receive complaints. And if there's some validity there, or there's a violation of the mobile home residency law, we make a connection between that individual and some legal services. So we also oversee the registration and titling program. This program is very similar to DMV. We license and register units that are manufactured homes, mobile homes, and commercial modulars. We also issue registration for floating homes, not to be confused with houseboats. I always like to give it dates me, but I like to give the association with MacGyver. If you ever have watched those older versions of MacGyver, he lived on a houseboat. The general difference between a floating home and a houseboat is a floating home, it essentially stays adjacent to a shoreline and it connects to utilities on the shore itself. They're typically not moved very often, but there's only a handful in the state, a handful of those in the state, but we do license them. We also provide a lot of technical assistance related to registration titling, again, very similar to DMV. And we have a lot of support services within our division. So I'm going to go into a lot of detail about structures a little bit later, but just a high-level overview of a few more programs that are more relevant to you all. We have a factory-built housing program. So this program is very unique, and that term factory-built housing is what we use in the state of California. Elsewhere in the country, they use the term modular. We try to get away from modular because modular is very, very close and tends to be erroneously associated with manufactured homes when these two different structures are vastly different. Factory-built housing are built to state standards, to the California Building Standards Code. They're not built to the same standards as manufactured homes. But in this program, we oversee the third-party agencies and the design and construction of these units. Our third-party agencies conduct inspections in factories. We have factories all around the world, in Estonia, Italy, Mexico, Canada, a lot here in California, and they produce factory-built housing, which can come in many different forms, really anything in our umbrella occupancy group. And they are shipped into the state and installed just like any other site-built structure on a complying foundation system. And you can have high-rise or single-family dwellings. So it's really versatile. And I'll talk about the delineation of jurisdiction here in a little bit and where HCD stops and the local jurisdiction starts. We also do monitoring of factories. So we travel and oversee the way these units are constructed. We intake complaints. If you all get a project that's factory-built housing, it's maybe the first time you've ever seen factory-built housing, and we have a whole team dedicated to providing you support. We have handbooks that we've developed that you can flip open the second you get your first factory-built housing project. Your inspectors, your plan reviewers will benefit from having that. And then also, we encourage pre-construction meetings for factory-built housing, which would involve the developer, builder, our third party potentially that approved designs and conducted inspections, and the local jurisdiction to get on the same page because it's a very unique process that isn't always relevant within your jurisdiction. So we have a manufactured housing program. In this program, we are approved by the federal government to act as a state administrative agency. And that role is really connected to the way manufactured homes are constructed in a factory. We ensure that units are produced correctly, consistent with plans. And if there's any sort of concerns or issues brought up by a purchaser, consumer, a builder, an installer, that we investigate those and make sure that the factory corrects it and doesn't produce any other units with those same issues. We also have statewide authority over special purpose commercial modulars. These come in many different forms, mobile food facilities, food trucks. There's all sorts of different types of units out there, but you may see your local health department approval on those units. But if you look closely, you'll see HCD's insignia. And our concern is really the design and construction of those units of special purpose commercial modulars. We have very subtle overlap with the health department on the units, but do have statewide application. And then, of course, we investigate complaints regarding all the structures within our jurisdiction. And the last program I want to talk about is our state housing law program. So HCD is charged by legislation to promulgate building standards for residential occupancies throughout the state. So I know a few folks earlier were talking about the last series of hearings that are coming up in a week and a half. Very happy to get our final package for the CRC, CBC, and CEBC out there so we can move into the 2025 codes effective January 1st, 2026. A lot of things developing as part of these packages related to EV charging. I know I believe Raj talked about the new Part 7. That's going to be very interesting, and a lot of things to come. And certainly HCD can respond, and we do often respond to requests to conduct presentations or outreach and training as new code cycles come about. Always happy to do that. We have experts internally on housing accessibility, ADUs, all sorts of things. We're already signed up for a few tours with Calbo, but if your local jurisdiction is seeking out some training, always happy to do it. State housing law is usually one of the subjects folks like to hear about. So I'll pause there for a minute. Again, can't see anything. If anyone has any questions about the state programs that we have, happy to answer them. I'll pause for some awkward silence for a moment and then move into structures.
Yeah, I don't see any posted
Awesome.
in our chat. Yeah.
Thanks, Louis.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to run through some different structures and vehicles and hopefully dispel some misconceptions about the jurisdictions, how these vehicles are operated, your authority with some of these structures or vehicles, and then HCD's jurisdiction and even some federal preemption that exists. So the first one I want to talk about is recreational vehicles. So RVs are built to industry standards. So based upon the date they were fabricated, there's two different sets of standards that apply. The current standard for traditional recreational vehicles, like you see on the screen, are NFPA 1192. These vehicles are built to that standard. They're used for recreational purposes. They are not under HCD's jurisdiction for approval. Back in the late 80s or the early 80s, HCD used to have jurisdiction. We would inspect these units in the factory, and that with the passage of some legislation, HCD no longer had that jurisdiction. So you may see some older recreational vehicles out there with HCD's label on it that signified that they were in compliance with the standards at the time of construction, but that's no longer a thing. HCD does not oversee the construction of these. In fact, they are the construction for these units are handled by the industry. So there's these NFPA standards and ANSI standards are under the direct control of industry. So they set the standards through a consensus process, and it makes up the ANSI or NFPA standard. And these units, HCD does not have oversight unless they're in a park under our jurisdiction, and we would only respond to complaint investigations for the areas around those units within parks. On private property outside of parks, that's totally under the local jurisdiction's authority. Certainly, you all see these units being used for permanent occupancy. And I like to drive attention to the statutory definitions of recreational vehicles. And the next type of recreational vehicle I'll talk about in a minute, that's called a park trailer. Those definitions define their use. And it's really important to read those definitions with your counsel so you can understand how they should be used locally, how you all decide they can be used locally, especially if their use is resembling a dwelling. So real quick, before I talk about park trailers, I like to say that it's a four-letter word to HCD, the term tiny homes. Folks use that kind of synonymously with many different types of structures or vehicles. I would say the majority of the time when someone calls a unit a tiny home, they are referring to a park trailer or recreational vehicle. Because there's so much confusion out there, and tiny homes is not a statewide term or defined term. We released an information bulletin. It's 2016-01 on our website. It's called Tiny Homes, and I try to use it in quotes because it's not a defined term, so that folks can understand what the structure they're looking at, who the jurisdiction is, and what standards apply. And so that's really helpful if you have, your permit counter is kind of in a quandary with a customer, trying to figure out who has oversight. This information bulletin is really helpful to figure out who the jurisdiction is. And I've also created, and I'll drop in the chat a little bit, a document called What Is It? And really it's just pictures of the different units, the labels, so that you and your teams can delineate what structure folks are talking about and what to do with those structures when you get them over your counter. So park trailers, like traditional recreational vehicles, they're vehicles, they're on the chassis, they're towed. The big difference is the size of park trailers. So either they're wider than 8.5 feet or taller than 14 feet. There's not really a length requirement, but they're so wide that they require a transportation permit. That's the big difference between a park trailer and a traditional recreational vehicle. And then the standards that apply, instead of NFPA 1192 for any currently constructed RVs, it's ANSI A119.5. Standards are somewhat similar, but there are some subtle differences between the two. So the state law 18027.3, it's on the screen there. This section of law is where you as local jurisdictions receive your authority to enforce standards related to recreational vehicles and park trailers. So I highly encourage you to look at that section, it's also what removed HCD from having oversight for the design and construction of recreational vehicles. Very important section, especially if you're dealing with a flood of folks using these for various types of occupancy within your jurisdiction. And one important thing I like to point out regarding the definition of park trailers, and this is for you to consume as you see fit. Park trailers are defined for use for seasonal and recreational purposes only. And so keep that in mind, that the standards were designed for those purposes and not necessarily permanent occupancy. All right, moving along here. I want to talk quickly about camping cabins. These are very unique. You may never come by them in your career. These particular structures are only used in special occupancy parks. They're unique to HCD. They're defined in our statute. The standards are prescribed in our regulations, and they are not permissible for use outside of special occupancy parks. They have some very prescriptive standards. We oversee design and construction at HCD. All alteration and conversions are under HCD. And again, they're prohibited for use anywhere but an RV or special occupancy park. All right, so there's always a misconception between what a mobile home is, and the next slide I'll be talking about is manufactured homes. A mobile home and manufactured home, the significant difference is the date by which they were constructed. In July 1st, 1976, the federal government came aboard and they said, we need some standards that apply to these structures so they can be used throughout the country instead of each state having their own set of standards for these mobile style units. And so when they came aboard in 76, they set standards through the Manufactured Housing Construction and Safety Standards. And from that moment forward, there were labels placed by HUD, the federal U.S. Department of HUD federal agency, and they conduct inspections with their third parties and factories. And once those labels for manufactured homes are applied, those units can be used anywhere throughout the country. Mobile homes, on the other hand, are generally in reference to anything built before 76, meaning HCD likely was the entity that approved these structures and issued label. The standards are slightly different. In fact, there are units that were produced before September 1st, 1958, and those units have no area of oversight or standards that may have applied to their construction. So there's an exemption for older units prior to 58. But mobile homes are built to HCD standards before that year in 76. And any new units that do not have any approval, but they resemble a mobile home, HCD has a special carve out to approve those only as a mobile home and issue a label like you see on the screen here. You tend to see them looking like the pictures that you see here, but even some more modern mobile homes that are altered or modified may look very similar to a site-built structure or a manufactured home. So statewide, HCD is the authority for alterations and conversions to manufactured homes, no matter where they sit in the state. The only exclusion really is federal lands, like federally exempt tribal lands. But anywhere else throughout the state, we issue permits, we do inspections, we enter private property for those things. In parks, outside of parks, we are the authority for alterations. And as a segue into manufactured homes, exactly same prescription applies. We are the authority for alterations and conversions to manufactured homes. Once HUD approves the construction of a factory, issues a label, and it leaves that factory, generally speaking, it's under HCD's authority for permitting the alteration or conversion to those units. Again, there's just a difference in the standards that apply and the authority based on that year of 1976. And the opportunity for local enforcement agencies to have oversight over mobile home parks. Will extend to the installation of manufactured homes within those parks, but also any installations that happen on private property outside of parks, that is under the local jurisdiction's permitting authority. When those units are altered or converted, that's when HCD steps in, but the installation is under the local jurisdiction. I want to briefly talk about the way these units are installed, since we get so many questions on that. You can install a manufactured home as chattel, meaning it's not a fixture or an improvement to the underlying real property. It's personal property at that point. Those chattel installations may resemble a HCD or HUD-approved foundation system. It may look like a pad and pier style system below the home, and it may look very similar. It's really about the design and approval. And so again, that permitting authority is under you all. But there are standard plan approvals that HCD approves for foundation systems. So you can go from a chattel to a foundation system install. And there's generally 3 ways that homes can be installed on foundation systems. And usually the goal is to record it as real property, but you certainly can install a manufactured home on a foundation system and not record it as real property. It can still be chattel. But usually it's a funding thing. The individual is seeking financing, and in order to get that financing, it needs to be recorded as real property. And so the 3 types of foundation systems, the first is just a general engineered foundation system from a licensed design professional. And that is all under if it's on a private property outside of a park, that's all up to the local jurisdiction to scrutinize. Obviously, those plans need to meet the local soil conditions or any other conditions that may apply. There's also a standard plan approval that HCD approves. So certain foundation systems are presented to us, we review and approve those, and then once they're approved, they may be used statewide. Those particular plans must meet the local conditions. So if the local conditions are not met based upon the plan provided, they certainly cannot be used for that individual installation. There's also HUD-approved standard plans, and identical in the way they're used. If the standard plans from HUD do not meet the local conditions on site, they cannot be used for that particular site, and you can certainly deny that an application for that type of installation. All right, factory-built housing, again, more nationally, the term is used modular. These units are typically designed, there's a consumer that connects with a manufacturer. I know we have over 250 about manufacturers throughout the world, and that consumer will seek out, the design of a dwelling or, a apartment complex or whatever it may be, and they work through the design. It all must comply with the applicable standards within Title 24, but also Title 25. We have some more rigid standards within there based upon the way they're constructed. Once that arrangement is completed, these units are produced in the factory and usually shipped out in modules, individual sections to the site. And then if it's multiple sections, they're erected on the site, and then closed up, and utilities are connected and all of that. There are labels on each of those sections. The big orange label you see there is for a system. So the system is usually a module, like a box that is transported and connected to other boxes on site. And the red label is for components like SIP panels and other things that may be approved by HCD through our third party. So once these units are on site, that's where HCD, for the most part, is out of the picture. We no longer have oversight over those. The local jurisdiction takes over, and the installation occurs consistent with several different unique documents that are provided by the builder or the applicant, including a resume of work. So this outlines exactly what needs to happen for the installation on site. There's installation instructions that identify the connection points between each module, and many other elements that are really critical for that installation. And then there's a matrix of jurisdiction that is provided in many different forms by our third party, but it delineates who's responsible for what. For instance, it'll say that the units were approved by HCD and we issued our label on the sections, but it may identify that the utility service on site is under the local jurisdiction, that the connection between each modules and the connections of the utility systems are under the local jurisdiction, and all the other details you need to understand what to look at for the inspections and any plan review. What we tend to see is confusion on the plan review part. So what the law says is anything that's already reviewed and approved by HCD there can't be a fee charge from the local jurisdiction to re-review that information. But the local jurisdiction certainly will need to look at all plans associated with the dwellings, the site elements, in order to ensure there's continuity there. Your load paths match between the dwellings and the foundation system and the like. So a lot to go through there, and it's, again, not as often in local jurisdictions. So we have handbooks, we have a team of staff that are willing to jump on the phone just to educate, to provide information, to step in whenever there's issues or concerns. And speaking of issues and concerns, one thing I said, generally HCD is out of the picture once the units get to the site. We do have an opportunity to investigate complaints. So if there are major systemic issues with the construction on site that were overlooked by the builder and our third parties, we can investigate those things and seek compliance through the manufacturer. So you're not completely on your own. In fact, you're not on your own. HCD is here to help with any factory-built housing products, but there is an avenue to investigate complaints.
Mitchell?
Yeah, go for it.
We have one question popped up. When reviewing the matrix of responsibility, who produces this document and who is responsible for review and approval of that doc?
Yeah, great question. So the responsible party is the designer. So the builder and designer are responsible for having that matrix, and the third-party agency that HCD employs is responsible for ensuring it's incorporated and gets passed on to the local enforcing agency through that permitting process. The one important part about that delineation of matrix is that it comes in different forms. We have produced a sample that's just a columnized document that says HCD, local enforcement agency, builder, and it'll list out different elements of a project and then who has jurisdiction. Some of our third parties incorporate it into the plan set. So what they'll do is they'll gray out all the sheets that HCD has reviewed and approved, and then they'll make special notes that are consistent with whatever the area of oversight for the local jurisdiction is. So it comes in different forms, but I highly encourage you all to ask for those things. Ask for the installation instructions, ask for the resume of work, ask for the delineation matrix. Right up front, have your plan reviewers ask for it from the applicant. Get that in your hands from day one, so you can eliminate a lot of confusion that usually comes with these projects. Great question, thank you.
Okay, we got a couple flooding in. So awesome. Let's see, next one is, who is responsible for the inspection?
So HCD oversees the construction of the units in the factory. So as each module or SIP panel or structurally insulated panel or component is being constructed in the factory, we oversee the construction in the factory. Once those units are shipped to the site, it becomes a construction element under the local jurisdiction's authority. So typically what you're looking for is the connection between those modules to a foundation system, to the serving utilities, and also between modules. The roof system may be coming separately. It may be an integral part of the module that may be set on site as part of the installation instructions. But again, refer to the plan set, the delineation matrix, and it'll show you exactly what you need to inspect on site as part of the permitting process.
Okay, next one. When the unit is installed and finalized by the building department, is the building department supposed to file forms for 33A, for 33B with HCD?
Thank you for that question. I really appreciate that. So for 33A, A, B, and C, these are documents only associated with manufactured housing. It's a document meant to inform multiple parties that a unit has been recorded as real property. And your assessors, HCD, your building department, that document is to inform those parties, in addition to the applicant, that has been recorded as real property. That is not the way a factory-built housing works. It's treated no differently in the way it's recorded than site-built structures. Hopefully that answers the question, but really appreciate that.
Looks like that's it, Mitchell.
Okay.
Now.
All right, I know there'll be more, and I'm happy to take all the questions. So I'm getting towards the end of the slides, but the next one is just to talk about site-built structures. There's a lot of information swirling out there about accessory dwelling units, ADUs, and junior accessory dwelling units. HCD's main role with site-built homes, dwellings, is the design and construction, the standards that apply for these different types of units. And we're not alone in that. Other agencies like the State Fire Marshal, of course, have their own standards that may apply, and we co-adopt a lot of provisions that apply to site-built structures. But when it comes to the alteration, conversion, just like for factory-built housing, for the life of a site-built structure that's under the local jurisdiction, a site-built dwelling, I should say, and outside of HCD's jurisdiction. When it comes to ADUs, and it's a very hot topic, I think we're going to be going on a few additional tours through Calbo to talk through ADUs. We've been doing that for a few years now, and happy to send some information out once all of that's on the calendar. Myself and our housing policy team, we team up and we answer all your questions about ADUs. But ADUs are very unique in that they derive from state law. The standards, specific standards, are within state law, and so it's a little nuanced. It's not like you can open, Part 2 or Part 2.5 and look at what applies directly. You have to also associate with the state law. So it's a little nuanced, but HCD, as a department within our housing policy division, we interpret that state law, or that team interprets state law, and they ensure compliance with that state law. We have a portal available. If you have any questions on ADUs, ADU law, interpretations, information that you need, that portal is available. I have some jurisdictions that often reach out to myself after they submit a question. Since there's so much interest in ADUs, they're pretty flooded. You're more than welcome to do that. If you submit a question, you don't get an answer in a reasonable amount of time, you're welcome to reach out to me, and I'll tap into that team and get you the answers you seek. But definitely, we're here for you on ADUs. There's a lot of ambiguity and a lot of different elements associated with it. So we're happy to help. We did just release, and I'm happy to drop it in the chat, our ADU handbook. It was just released at the beginning of the year, and it has the most important part is the Q&A section at the end. Definitely encourage you all to review that. We try to incorporate every single year the most commonly asked questions from folks and answer those directly in the booklet. So it's a formal guide that you can refer to if you ever need information. But please join us at our tours on ADUs coming up, so that we can connect you with the right people and get you answers to any of your questions. All right. So before we get into Q&A, there's a lot of interaction with HCD and local government from various elements. And, Raj spoke a lot about executive orders. I'm leading a few charges on executive orders right now that will certainly impact local government. If you're interested in providing me your insights about those executive orders, I'll make sure you all have my email address. You're welcome to send stuff along, and I'll do my best to bring it up to our work group of state agencies that are working on those executive orders regarding building standards, regarding permit requirements locally. Happy to do that. But we provide a lot of technical assistance beyond that type of work here today, providing you all some outreach and training, but we make ourselves available to be supportive for our statewide programs. We're also, of course, a proposing agency, as mentioned earlier, under a state housing law. And I always love to hear, ideas, concepts from folks regarding, barriers that they believe exist in the existing building standards, or new ideas where HCD may have the authority to propose. We encourage folks to participate in the building standards process. We're all busy, but it's certainly beneficial to the entire state for folks to jump on those Building Standards Commission meetings, any of our pre-cycle focus group meetings, and give us your thoughts, because really you all are the folks out there doing that hard work and seeing it firsthand, and we benefit from your knowledge and expertise. So please encourage you all to get your folks engaged in that process, and provide feedback where appropriate. All right,
Mitchell, we have one more question, or actually two more questions just dropped in. Let's see here. All right, so first question. For FVH component installation, for example, roof assembly transported separately or between module installation instructions, is that in the form of structural details, or will need additional installation instructions in their QA manual? Who does the inspection? Local jurisdiction level of responsibility for this?
Yeah, really great question. So factory built housing does come in different forms. When it comes to like a roof system that's assembled on site in connection with, let's say, a module, a factory built housing module or system, that all is inspected by the local jurisdiction. That component, the series of SIP panels that may be erected together on site to make up a roof system, there should be installation instructions, a manual for that application that is provided by the manufacturer, and approved by our third-party agency, something for you to follow on site to ensure that the design that was approved by that third-party agency mirrors whatever the construction is on site. So the inspections are under you all. Everything that comes together on site for factory built housing, and I want to stress this is not the same as manufactured housing, but for factory built housing, is that installation on site is fully under the jurisdiction of the locals.
Okay, next question. Many applicants try to move units that have no sticker or insignia. We have no choice but to turn those down. Any input? Can anything be recertified? I guess is the question.
Yeah, good question. So there's different types of structures that kind of fold into that comment or question. There could be a manufactured home, a mobile home, the commercial modulars, which are office trailers that we tend to see. There's special purpose commercial modulars like the food trucks and other things. If there's no insignia on those units and you can clearly see they meet the scope of what one of our structures is, or the definition, they certainly need to come to HCD and receive an inspection and an insignia and you can redirect those folks to us. We're happy to take that on and educate them and walk them through our processes. It's surprisingly not that expensive for the individuals. It's under $250 for them to get an inspection, what we call a coding inspection, for a special purpose commercial modular to receive that insignia. But if you have a unit and you're unsure what it is, or if HCD is the appropriate agency to issue an insignia or a label, I'm going to drop in the chat. In fact, I may just, if I can do it quickly, I'll open a document to walk through, and I know there's probably some more questions, but I think relevant to the question, you may benefit from seeing this. See if that worked. Hopefully that's on your screen, and I'll zoom in as best I can.
Yes, we could.
So, yeah, if you have units that are without a label or insignia, and you're like, this is mobile, it doesn't seem right as a local jurisdiction approval, this is helpful to post on your counter. You know, we all have turnover. It's something that's easily referable, and it's a good educational tool. So it just outlines some of the stuff I talked about earlier on the slides. But you know, there's requirements on locations of insignias. So on a commercial modular, your insignia has to be on the bottom left hand corner of each transportable section. So if there's no insignia or label here on that, it's usually on the tail side. But if there's no insignia or label there, and it is being used for industrial, professional, or commercial purposes, it's likely under HCD, and they need to come to us to get an approval of that unit and receive an insignia. The commercial, special purpose commercial modulars, we have like MRI trucks, smaller office trailers that are vehicles, and food trucks. Same thing. You'll see that on the bottom left hand side of each section. You should find an HCD label or insignia. If you don't, send them our way, and we'll make sure and get that approval. That's what your insignia looks like. And then this talks about all the other structures, but and a few others I didn't talk about today that are very, very rare, but something I want to pass along to you all so that you have access to it, and maybe can help, particularly related to that question about units without approval from any agency.
Great. Okay, so at this point, since Mitchell, it seems like you were done and you're ready for questions. So let's go ahead and ask your questions. Unmute yourself if you have a question.
I see one about HVAC systems. While folks are figuring out how to raise your hand or unmute yourself, I can answer that one. So the question is, when multiple FBH modules are connected, I understand that the connections are inspected by the locals. Does this extend to HVAC ductwork, piping? Do items like HERS verification apply to these elements? So if that information about specifically what needs to be inspected is not in the resume of work or the delineation matrix, ask for it. You don't need to make the call on your own. Ask for that information. It should be delineated there. Generally speaking, when you have multiple modules or systems that are shipped and erected together on site, the connections between HVAC ducting systems would be required. The manufacturer will test each individual module to ensure that it doesn't have any duct leakage. However, the entire system is obviously not inspected in a factory. So there will be HERS verification requirements, and that should be delineated in the various documents you should get with it. There are some exceptions to that. If you have a single module that is created in a factory and it's merely just placed on a foundation system, there's not multiple sections that connect together, it may have received its HERS rating verification in the factory.
Looks like Fuad had a question.
Yeah, thank you, Mitchell. Great presentation. Now, when it comes to the factory-built housing for affordable housing, when they build those and they want to put them together, there are fire rated walls and corridors that are usually not part of the manufacturing. They actually build that on site. So usually with the delineation matrix, you have to have the plant checker check those, and then you have to have the local inspector also inspect those. So when they submit the plans, do they submit the matrix with it so that everybody knows what their uh, responsibilities are?
Yeah, that's exactly what they're supposed to do. We see a lot of fire-rated corridors, like especially, hotels, motels, and apartment complexes, and those are almost exclusively site-built, and so they're under the permitting and inspection authority for that construction on site by the local jurisdiction. But all of that should be detailed. It should be as simple as possible on local enforcement agencies to quickly look at a set of plans and determine what should our inspectors be looking at on site during the construction here. And if it's not, that's where we have a team of folks that can step in and help out, and third-party agencies that can provide that information if it's not already as a default provided.
Thanks.
Anyone else?
I have a question. Can you hear me, or am I
Yes.
muted?
can hear you.
This is Scott Fazekas. Do you have the statute or the section of the Health and Safety Code regarding the soils policy requirements of a local jurisdiction? That seems to come up a lot with developers saying they're going to use the HCD approved standard foundation and they don't want to listen if they've got soils conditions.
Yeah, I can do you one better. I have a compilation of sections of code, but a plain language explanation through an information bulletin. I've been trying to drop stuff in the chat and it's not letting me. But I did see that there was a comment in the chat that the information and files will be available online. So what I'll do is there's an information bulletin I'll provide, and hopefully that can be placed in those public files so that you can have access to it. But it speaks directly to this, how standard plan approvals work, how foundation systems work, and then the local conditions that need local approval for any of the systems that are used on site. So I'll make sure and provide that. Please reference it. Contact us if you have any questions.
Thank you very much.
Mitchell, if you could just please forward me the presentation and whatever you need, and we'll be posting it as mentioned by our secretary later today. Thank you.
We'll do that. Yep.
Well, as soon as you can send it, Mitchell.
Yep.
Hey, Luis. I also have one question. Yeah, this is Farooq from City of Los Angeles. Does the matrix also shows compliance with accessibility, especially that becomes a dilemma for public housings, which they have different type of units, mobility units and adaptable units? Does the matrix reflect the compliance? If so, what extent? Because some of these units, it depends, should have, let's say, 5% or 10% of the units to have mobility features. The rest have adaptable features.
And I'm going to answer that in just a second. Louis, do we have a few more minutes? I'm not sure when our time was up. Okay.
Yes, we do.
Give me just a second. I'm going to open what a matrix would look like, because yes, the short answer to your question is yes. It specifically calls out 11B and or 11A requirements on the delineation matrix. It also should be in the resume of work for the unit, and how and where that applies. Funding is always a fishy thing up front to figure out. Our parts, our elements, publicly funded, and then what portions may have to comply with the 11B. So all of that should be dispelled in the delineation matrix. And I'm going to open the HCD handbook so I can show you what that looks like, so you can get a sense of all the information for factory built housing that will be provided in the event you get a project within your jurisdiction. So I'm going to open that and share my screen once again real quick. go. Just a second here. Share my screen. I can get this to come up. It's saying it's not available. So on our website here, we have a factory built housing page, and down at the bottom here, it's factory built housing for local government, builders, and the general public. And I'm hoping that's not just an error. Oh gosh. Well, it's not working for some reason. Let's see if we can find it offline. We also have a pamphlet here with the general, oh, it's also not working. Looks like HCD's website is down for the moment. But yeah, anyways, it's, if you can imagine an Excel table with 3 columns, one of the columns is how accessibility standards and who has jurisdiction, what has been reviewed in the factory. And I'll make sure I get the handbook to the group.
So we had another question. Somebody's raising their hand. Mark, I believe. Go ahead.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, Mark.
Yeah, hi. So does the HCD oversee the repurpose of the sea containers for modular housing stackable units?
Yeah, great question. So the way HCD treats shipping containers, if they're incorporated into factory built housing, they're treated just like a building material. What we see is a lot of folks getting creative with shipping containers. They're really designed for only certain types of loads. The vertical loads, they're really not designed for placing on the ground and then immediately using as a dwelling unit naturally. And folks tend to create openings in those units, and it's really hard to get compliance there. So what folks are doing is proposing projects that are factory built housing, but we just treat it as any other material in that design. And typically there's support structures inside of it, you know, type 5 framing inside of the interior part of the shipping container, and then a lot of creative design from architects or engineers to get those in compliant with Title 24. But it depends on their use. Generally, you won't see a shipping container straight off a boat or a ship being used as a commercial modular, a special purpose commercial modular. Folks are using them for storage a lot of the time, but for factory built housing, it's a billing component. It's treated as a material and no differently for us. You will see those every once in a while, but there's a lot of engineering that goes into using them. You know, a lot of it's just the exterior walls being used for shear, and the rest is constructed within the dwelling to meet compliance with all engineering practices.
Yeah, we had a couple of projects that had the use of sea containers, and they were built abroad and then shipped in here, and I had to go and certify it by the sticker and see exactly the type it was. And they came with all the plumbing and electrical already built in from these factories. And the state is the one that actually approved the plans and did all the inspections. And then when they came here, they were set on foundations that were inspected by the city. There was one that was called Flyaway, and another one that was called I forget the other name. But also, what about the HDPE modular units as well? Do you guys oversee those as well? They're almost like Lego blocks that they just pins and structural components that are kind of connected on a foundation as well. We had one in El Monte. It was called Life Arc, and it was completed a couple of years ago. But very interesting the way they did it. But they also had, I think it was one of the gentlemen there that mentioned Fouad about the fire safety and fire stopping. It didn't come approved with that one, so then they had to retrofit it and put in sprinklers and everything else, and it was quite the challenge.
Yeah, I mean, if those type of projects are coming in your jurisdiction, if it resembles, if it looks and quacks like a factory built housing, then it should have gone through our process. So always great to ask if you're seeing units that are mobile, that are being shipped in somewhere, and they're used for residential dwellings. question whether or not it should have gone through HCD. The problem there is, if you have something that's concealed, like walls and, MEPs within those walls, and they weren't inspected in the factory, me as a building inspector, I would do a lot of destructive inspection to make sure it complies. But if they're produced in a factory without any oversight during the construction, you can just conjure up a bunch of stuff that can go wrong. So we want to make sure that those units are approved by us, and if not, we make a connection with a manufacturer to make sure they have the appropriate approvals. But if there's no label, question it.
But the information that you're bringing forth right now would somehow address in I guess in segment how to frame those questions to ask if they fall in those categories.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, you'll get this "what is it" document. You can say, just hand it to them. Tell me what type of standards you're constructing this to. Where's HCD's approval? Tell me which unit it is so I know what to do from that point on. And that document, the PowerPoint presentation, folks refer to that a lot. I get a copy of it with the a circle in it. What does this mean? How do I do this? And use those tools to communicate with your applicants and try to figure things out. I've been in a lot of conversations with folks and gone down many rabbit holes when they use that term tiny homes or other modular type terminology, and they're really referring to something else. So pictures are really helpful, I've learned over the years, and so that's why these documents were created. So folks can look at it and say, that's what mine looks like, and then you can say, where's HCD's approval? So
perfect.
We'll make sure and get those resources to you. Thanks for the question, Mark. I see a question in the chat about factory-built housing and whether or not the approval by our third-party agencies is required to comply with local requirements. Absolutely. Local site conditions, the unit should comply. One thing I wanted to mention about that is HCD, through our statutory authority, we have the ability to approve the foundation system up. So in some cases, it's not that often, but in some cases, HCD actually approves the design of the foundation system and then upward. However, we do not inspect the construction of that foundation system on site. That's under the locals. Most projects, the foundation system is not reviewed and approved by our third parties. And so just something to keep in mind, because you're talking about soil conditions and hillsides and stuff like that. So we really wouldn't be involved in many cases with that part of it. But certainly the design of those structures should comply with the local conditions. And if they don't, call it out. We're happy to work with through our third parties to make sure they do. So question in the chat, how does HCD's authority intersect with federal HUD approved housing? So manufactured housing is approved by HUD in the factory. They affix a label to it. Once it's shipped out of the factory, it's under the respective state's jurisdiction. So any manufacturers that come into the state of California, they're under HCD's jurisdiction, again, no matter where they sit in the state of California, except federally exempt lands like tribal lands for alterations and conversions. We issue the permits, we do inspections. The construction is required to comply with federal standards. It's not Title 24, it's a federal standard. So that's why HCD is the jurisdiction for the alterations. But those units, when they're installed on private property, the installation is under the local permitting for the installation is under the local jurisdiction. And when it's in parks under HCD's jurisdiction, the installation is under HCD. Thanks for the question. How can local jurisdictions verify labels and insignias are not fake? Oh, great question. So we do have a team that can do some verification for you. One of the resources I'll drop in is an email address. It's contact.mh/fbh@hcd.ca.gov. I'll provide that along. You can always reach out to that team and they can verify the validity of some insignias. HUD oversees manufactured home labels. So HCD doesn't always have all the records for that. If it is a manufactured home or mobile home, On our website, you can do a title search and gather that information in order to approve. But generally speaking, you can always reach out to HCD if you're inspecting a unit on site, your teams are, and we can do some validation for you. So one of the questions is, do they now manufacture factory built housing intended exclusively for high fire severity zones, I'm guessing? And yeah, absolutely. So 7A is a requirement, ignition resistant construction. If a unit is going into an area where it has to comply with WUI standards, certainly should. There's no difference between a site built and factory built housing when it comes to ignition resistant construction. Similar to HCD's jurisdiction, FBH, a resume of work would be required for the site built elements, interconnections of a federal HUD approved building, correct? So I think the question is, just like factory built housing, you have all of these tools that are provided by the applicant for the inspection and plan review. Same thing is consistent with HUD. There are there's a manual that comes with every single manufactured home that identifies how that unit's installed. If the consumer is deciding to go with a HUD-approved foundation system, that HUD-approved foundation system would be part of that manual. But it identifies if it's multiple sections, how the connections work. All of that information is in that HUD-approved manual that comes with the unit.
Looks like you have another question. Felix raised his hand.
Yes, actually, I was going to ask that question for manufactured housing. What can we ask for in terms of plans, and is there a resume at work? But you just answered that. So, because sometimes we get resistance when we ask them for this information, they don't want to provide it. So, how far can we go with it?
Yeah, and usually the issue comes into play. We deal with this often is when there's a requirement for fees to be paid. So when you have a manual, there's preemption there. HUD, federal agency, has approved that, so it's not an element of review. However, if there's a proposed engineered foundation system, no different on how you would review and approve that foundation system, making sure you'll need to make sure that there's the load paths match up to the manufactured home. So you may need documents associated with that review. But it really is when something is approved by HCD or HUD, and there's not an authority to charge fees for those situations, and that's usually where there's a little bit of conflict with a C-47 contractor or the consumer or what have you when they're seeking a permit from your local jurisdiction. So just be mindful of charging fees for the work. There's nothing that prohibits you from looking at plans, making the association between elements of the unit itself and whatever foundation system it's being set on. It's just you can't charge fees for stuff that's already been approved by HCD. Looks like there's another. Felix has made a comment.
Yeah, we'll be posting this online, like the secretary put in the chat. So it'll be online, the presentation on our website, and you'll be able to go through the slides presentation. Somebody asked that again, didn't they? Yeah.
Felix, did you have a question?
Oh, you just answered it. Yeah, that was me. Thanks.
That was your question? Okay, yeah. Cool. Right on. There was a question about stamps. So each page of a plan set should have our third-party agency's approval. It'll delineate that they're approving factory-built housing, again, to distinguish between manufactured housing or other structures, and the name of that agency and the standards that apply. So you should see a stamp on every sheet that HCD has approved or our third parties have approved. And then anything without that stamp is all yours. So watch for those. And again, one of the techniques that I'm sure you're all used to is some of our third parties gray out sheets of plans to give even more emphasis on what they've already approved. Any other questions? One thing I like to say is we're a resource. Like now you know who I am and who Michael Barberi is, and if you need stuff, these questions usually come up in the thick of it when you have a new project. Reach out to us and our teams. We're always happy to have a conversation with y'all and give you any answers to your questions, as quickly as we possibly can to avoid any delays in these type of affordable housing units being